This is a quick demonstration of GenFHI. GenFHI is a low-code developer platform for the FHIR standard. For this demonstration, we'll build and deploy a Smart on FHIR application. Smart on FHIR is a framework that is used to create applications that you can connect to your EHR to both read and write data. So the demo app we're about to create has the possibility of connecting with many of the large EHR systems. So to start off with, we're currently logged in to GenFHI. The screen you see is my organization's workspace. On registration, we create a workspace for your organization. A workspace can have multiple users and various resources associated with it. And all of our tools have syncing built into them, so you can have multiple users editing and creating new resources in parallel. Additionally, the synchronization is at the field level, so you can have multiple edits happening across an app and have them coalesce in a way that isn't going to step on each other's toes. To start off with, we're going to create an endpoint resource. So I'll click endpoint here, and I'll click create. We're going to use the Smart launcher, which is a way to test Smart on FHIR applications. So I'll call this Smart launcher, and I have an address I can use here. 1 second. Okay, I'll hit create. So for endpoint resources, requests that will use this endpoint resource, we can modify the headers. So in this case, for every single request, we're going to send a content type of application JSON by default. And we support several different methods of authorization. So we support basic, this is just standard basic auth, Smart standalone launch, and Smart EHR launch. We'll use Smart EHR launch, so this will be essentially, this application will have the ability to launch within an EHR as an iframe. So we'll go ahead and click that. I'll add a client ID of testing, and we'll maintain the issuer, so we'll use that for testing purposes. And let me add a couple of scopes. So these scopes will give me access to my logged in users' information. Additionally, it'll give me access to the associated patient's patient resource, observations. We'll have the ability to read our user's practitioner resource and the patient's procedure resources. So I'm going to go ahead and click save here. We get that message, endpoint saved, looks good. I'll click home. So now let's go ahead and create the actual application. So I'll hit create up top here. I'll click client application. So when we create a new application, we have an option either starting from scratch or using templates. I want to go ahead and start from scratch. And for this application, it's going to be a practitioner view of the active patient and their encounter. And it'll provide some contextual information related to that encounter, specifically observation resources and procedure resources. So I'm going to go ahead and name this practitioner, patient, and encounter info. And I'll provide a description. And I'll hit create. So we're taken to our application editor screen. So this is a sort of WYSIWYG style editor where you can drag and drop in components and see data. So to start off with, I'm going to drag and drop in a list component. And I'm going to go ahead and create what we call actions. So actions are how we can query out using that endpoint resource we just made. So I'll click FHIR query. Endpoint is where we specify the endpoint resource. So we want to use the one that we just made, Smart Launcher. And when we click resource, we're given a list. We actually pull this list off of the endpoint. We use the capability statement to show us what resources are available. So I'll search for observation. You can see we can query out to observations for this endpoint. I'll click that. I'm going to hit save, and I'll change the name of this to observations. And this is how we can reference it within components, which I'll get to. So we want to add this to data. So we use what's called application FHIR query expressions to tie components together. And essentially, anything between two curly braces is a FHIR path we evaluate. And so we can reference actions as FHIR path variables. So if you look at the data input, I'll put two curly braces, and I'll do percentage. We get a list of FHIR path variables. One of those is observations, which is what we just named it. Click that. It's going to initiate the smart off flow automatically. I'm going to go ahead and log in. And I'll choose, let's choose this recent. Let's choose this encounter. I'll hit approve. Okay, so we now have data coming in through that endpoint. I'll do dot, and we have a list of properties available to us. So it does automatic completion for properties. We can see the raw bundle of the request. So this was a search type, so we're going to receive a bundle. Or we can just do dot response, which is going to give us the entries from that bundle. So it's more of a convenience factor. So I'll do dot response. And now we have data coming in and populating this table component. Additionally, we can just do plain JSON. So if we have a hard-coded list, we can just do something like this. So I'll do name, it's test. It's going to automatically populate some of these columns based on the data it receives. But we'll just go ahead and leave it to observations. So a couple of things about this table, our table component. It's automatically going to display FHIR data in a readable format. So for example, category, this is a codable concept, but we're displaying it as plain text. If we double click it, we can actually see the raw JSON, and we can copy parts as we see fit. And this is both as an end user and as a developer. The same is true for quantity. So let's go ahead and make this column a little bit larger. We can see the unit type and the value. If we double click it, we can see the actual JSON. So this is a quantity data type, which is standard in FHIR. And we do this for several other types as well. We can change the ordering of columns on the right-hand side. So I can drag and drop value quantity ahead if I wanted to, and I can put code up. So code will give us more details about the type of observation. So let's go ahead, and the next step is to add a banner for our application. So I'll go here, I'll drag and drop in an HTML component. We'll go ahead and make it a bit larger. And I have some HTML I can use for this. And I'll walk through what this HTML is actually doing. So I'll click the expansion option here and paste in this HTML. So this HTML is referencing a couple of variables that we'll need to define. One of them being patient, so that's the current active patient. Another being encounter, the current active encounter, and the encounter participant. So this would be within the encounter resource, the .participant field. And we'll go ahead and click finish, and we'll define those. And one other quick note is whenever these variables are changing, this component's going to automatically re-render. So we're obviously doing a lot of things asynchronously here. Once those asynchronous requests resolve, the component will display the data from whatever the response is. So I'll go ahead and click finish. And let's go ahead and define those queries. So the first one was patient. So we want to stick with Smart Launcher. And we'll again search for on the resource field, so this time for patient. We also have a list of available operations we can do for the patient resource. This is also pulled from that capability statement. So different servers will allow different things. We want to read the patient resource, so I'll click read. And here we want to use a special variable. So we have a variable that stores smart information. It's called endpoint. We can see it being completed here. So we'll do percentage endpoint, hit enter. and we'll use the endpoint that we're using. So this is based on ID, and we want to get the patient ID. So whenever, depending on the context of how you log in through SMART, you may or may not have some of these variables. We have a patient ID associated with our login, so we're going to go ahead and use that. So .patient.id. Okay, and we can see underneath the expression the value we're getting. So in this case, it's the C20, CC, etc. UUID. So I'll hit save, and we're going to go ahead and rename this to patient, and we'll get out of that. And we can now see at the top our HTML component has automatically re-rendered with that data. So we are doing patient.response.name, and we can see it's actually populating that here on that HTML. Let's go ahead and finish with the encounter and then the encounter participant. So Smart Launch, we'll search for encounter and change this to read, and we'll use percentage endpoint. Use the encounter in this time as opposed to patient.id, and we can see the result underneath. Let's hit save, rename this to encounter, get out of there. We now can see the encounter types showing up here, and then the next thing is just getting the encounter participant. So in this case, it's going to be a practitioner resource, and we want to do read again. And we're actually going to reference the encounter action. So it'll have a dependency to that. So we'll do percentage encounter. We want the response. So we're using participant and the individual. So we can see we're getting completion on the properties inside of that. And we want to do the dot reference. And here I'll just go ahead and replace practitioner, just empty string, so we can only pull the ID in. We can see the result of this query underneath. Let's save. Oops. Save, and we want to change this to encounter participant. Yeah, okay, and there it is showing up there. So this is pulling off of that encounter the practitioner. Let's go ahead and go back to our observations list. So right now we're pulling in all observations that we're allowed to pull in through this login. We want to filter that down. So we're going to add a parameter here. We're going to say only use the encounter that's associated with our login. And we can see when we type inside of parameters, we're getting a list available to us. Again, this is coming from that capability. So these are actual parameters supported by this server. Each FHIR server is going to have different sets of search parameters that they could support. So we'll type encounter. We can see a description of that parameter, encounter related to this observation. That's exactly what we want. And we'll go ahead and use the endpoint variable to say my active encounter. So .encounter.id. See the result, looks good. Let's save. It's automatically going to requery because the parameters have changed. And this looks correct. If we want to, we can also filter by patient, although that may or may not be necessary. And we can just use .patient.id as opposed to encounter.id. Let's go ahead and change the label. So we can, most properties we have are this application FHIR query syntax, so we can add a little more context to the label. So let's do percentage patient dot response dot name dot given, and we'll do observations. So we'll add plain text next to it. This looks good. Let's go ahead and make this a little bit larger. And let's add procedures as well. So I'll click New Query, and we'll search for procedures. In this case, we want to use encounter. So this will be procedures associated with this encounter. We'll go back to components. We'll drag and drop in a list component. And we'll associate it with that action. So .response. And let's go ahead and put the code up. We'll hide meta, and we'll put the status. We'll put the perform period, and we can make these columns a bit larger so we can see the end date a little bit easier. Okay, so I think this is a good starting off place for our application. So let's go ahead and deploy the application. So we click deploy on the top right of the screen. We have 3 different options for deployments. One option is if you want to have a public cloud link, which is the tab we're currently on. We also allow you to create Docker images. So these are standalone applications. The other option is we allow you to get the application's data as a JSON file. And so if we have available an app runner that you can run as a Docker image as well, but it'll basically load applications from the file system. So you can have one Docker image that's potentially associated with multiple applications. So that's the difference between it and just having this as its own standalone Docker image. For now, we want to go ahead and use a public cloud link. So I'll hit deploy as a public app. We can see our link. We can also see what endpoint resources we're using. So for those endpoints, if you've registered a client, you may need to update redirect URLs. And so we provide those underneath here. So we'll hit copy. We'll go to Smart Launcher. And we're going to launch this as a provider using an EHR launch. So I'll paste in that link. We'll hit launch. And it's going to initiate the login. So I'll use PA Alondra McGee. I'll hit login. And we'll log in as, we'll select the patient, Joffrey Abbott this time. So this should be, I believe, a different patient than what we were using. Yeah, we're using Bradley Fanner still. So we'll hit Joffrey Abbott. We'll do encounter, checkup procedure. It initiates the login and pulls in that data. So we can see it's a different set of data, obviously. We've logged in as a different user and a different patient and encounter that we're viewing. So that's it for this demo. We have several other features that I'll cover in later videos. If you have any questions or interest, feel free to reach out on the links provided in the description of the video. Thank you.